Well, this has been another great weekend of reading. We continue in our readings of Joseph and all he has been through. It's interesting now, after Joseph's been in prison, that he's now becoming more sensitive to the emotions of others, and he sees that in the cupbearer and the baker, and he talks to them about that. And they're disturbed about dreams that they had, and uh, Joseph is very quick to remind them that he is not one that has the power to interpret dreams, but that if God chooses, that God will allow him to do so, and in this case, God does. He interprets their dreams, and within 3 days, what Joseph said would happen did. However, it was 2 long years before the cupbearer would remember what Joseph had done. And that was the case where Pharaoh likewise had 2 dreams, and he sought counsel from those around him, and nobody was able to interpret those. And so uh, it was at that point that the cupbearer then remembered, oh, yeah, there was this guy in prison, and he explained to him exactly what their dreams were, and the events of that. And as we recall from the weekend's reading, that's exactly what happened. And Pharaoh called Joseph to his courts, and Joseph came came before Pharaoh, and again he was quick to give God the glory. He said with God's direction that he would be able to interpret the 2 dreams. And as we know, it was very disturbing to Pharaoh, talking about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And because of that, he made Joseph head over just about everything in Egypt, with the exception of being Pharaoh himself. Uh, Moving ahead 9 years, a band of brothers appear before Joseph. Uh, he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. They're the same brothers that had sold him into slavery, but Joseph looks a little different, as you can imagine. He has been through slavery and prison, and now he is the top dog in Egypt. And they came, and it's interesting, immediately they did exactly what Joseph told them they would do out in the fields, that they would bow down before him. And it's interesting that he talked about the grain, their grain bowing before his, and that is exactly where they are at this point. They are at a point of needing grain, or they'll starve, and their families will starve. And so they were bowing down before what they thought was this Egyptian leader, again having no idea that this was their brother. But Joseph wasn't looking for revenge. Again, time had healed, and God had worked in Joseph's life and in Joseph's heart for him to start to understand God's plan through all of this. He had already recognized that God had allowed all of this to happen in order to save his family. And I'm sure that he knew the stories and the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from God, that they would be great nations, and generations would come from their lineage. As Jacob traveled to Egypt to see his son, he came to Beersheba and stopped to offer a sacrifice to God. That was in Genesis 46, verses 1 through 4. Jacob knew the significance of this place. We first hear about it in Genesis 21:31, where it says he called the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because there was because there the 2 of them, and that was Abraham and Abimelech, took an oath, and so they named that Beersheba. It was also placed after Abraham went up on the mountain at God's direction to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. And again, we remember that story where God provided substitute, a ram to be sacrificed in the place of Isaac. And Scripture in Genesis 22:19 says, Abraham returned to his young man, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. I can only imagine Jacob had great joy, but when he came to this significant place, he offered a sacrifice. And as a result of Jacob's faithfulness, God appeared to him yet again and confirmed that he was to go to Egypt. Though God blessed the journey, God did also tell Jacob that he would die in that foreign land. I love the dialogue recorded between God and Jacob. The Lord called Jacob, Jacob. And Jacob simply said, "Here I am." And it says, "I am God." And God continues to share his plan for the days ahead. Abraham and Sarah's family had grown to 70 members of Jacob's family in the land of Egypt, plus the wives and son. Again, Abraham and Sarah started the two of them, and at a very old age had Isaac. And now we've seen that family grow to 70 members of Jacob's family, not including what we've already read in the long lineage of Esau's family. I found it interesting how Pharaoh welcomed Jacob's family in light of what was recorded in Genesis 43, verse 32. And at that point, just a reminder, in the story, it was at the point where Joseph was sitting down and having a meal with his brothers. At this point, they still did not know who he was. And the Egyptians that ate their meals with Joseph were also a part of that meal. And in Genesis 43:32, it said, "The Egyptians who ate with Joseph sat at their own table, because Egyptians despised Hebrews." And the reason I find it interesting that Pharaoh would welcome Jacob and his family is just because they despised the Hebrews. And not only did they despise them, they didn't want to have a whole lot to do with them. Yet Pharaoh offered the very best of Egypt to Joseph and his family. And so despite those that despised the Hebrews, Pharaoh saw great favor in Joseph. Jacob was 130 when he entered and came into Egypt. He had lived a long life. And as God had told him, his life would end there in Egypt. I look forward to spending another week with you as we journey through the Word.